How's it going? So I'd like to introduce our next panel. Our main moderator is Dr. Victor Zakhary. He just got his PhD about 3 days ago, so if everyone can put his hands together for Victor. Next week, Dr. Trinabh Gupta. He's an assistant professor here at UCSB in the computer science department. He's working on some really interesting privacy-related research, and he will be also joining the panel. Next week, Preethi Kasireddy. She's currently running True Story, which is an incredible platform that they're actually sponsoring outside. You can learn a lot more about them later. They will do an incredible rundown. She used to work for A16Z and Andreessen Horowitz, and also she was a software engineer at Coinbase for a good while. So if everyone can put their hands together for her. Last but not least, this is Jay Freeman. He is one of the co-founders of the Orchid protocol, and also if you guys know about jailbreaking your iPhone, so he created Cydia, which is the app store to facilitate all of that. So if you've ever downloaded a Game Boy emulator on your phone back in the day, that's what I was doing in freshman year of high school. It's because of him, so thank you.
All right, thanks Cameron for the introductions. I'm not going to do introductions again, but we'll jump into questions. So I think it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about data privacy and ownership. And we have a great set of panelists, and would like just to start with a very basic questions. I would like everyone just to introduce to me, what is your perspective about data privacy and why is it important? Everyone. Preethi, you can.
Now, okay, sweet. So I'll be completely honest, I'm not a data privacy expert per se. I'm probably more focused on the trust part. But from a personal experience, having worked at tech companies in the past, I think when the modern generation of social apps and just apps in general got created, we went for the glamour of speed, convenience, and sort of the value that this supposed technology gives us, connecting with humans, whatever it is. There was really no thinking behind what are the trade-offs you make to get those conveniences. And I think finally people are realizing what the trade-off is, which is your data. And all of a sudden, users find out that their data is being collected to give them all these amazing services, and they're freaking out. And I think we're gonna land somewhere in the middle of where we end up of how much data is collected versus not. But obviously we don't want them to collect that much data, but then we also have to figure out what the trade-off is with convenience. So it's a whole battle, which we'll hopefully get into. But I fall somewhere in between.
Yeah, Jim. So when I think of data privacy, I think a lot about making certain that people feel in control of the information about themselves, that they know to whom they're disclosing what about themselves. You think about things that people might want to keep private. They might want to keep information about their medical background private, or maybe they want to keep information about their family private. Maybe they maybe they are trying to apply for a job, and there's something about their background that, for example, it's an upsetting thought, right? It's a situation where somebody might be transsexual, and they feel the need, because our society is so oppressive of people who are in that situation, to not have that information disclosed or available to particular people to whom they're applying for a job. It's a painful situation. It's one that actually makes me kind of emotionally, annoyed about, if nothing else, is the idea that we've ended up in a situation where companies seem to believe that the correct way of solving all problems is to have everyone give all of their information to them, and then have them build giant indexes of everything that about everybody, in order to be able to use that information in order to target them with advertisements, or to be able to provide them some temporary convenience of be able to fast and more quickly search for a photograph of somebody, which the person might not have even wanted. I think that people are also, in some sense, the trade-offs that people have in their minds with respect to privacy are, it's difficult for any end user to really think about, because when you think, hey, I'm sorry, by the way, I'm sufficiently flailing around this question here, because this is a broad one, and it's one like
it is very broad.
Yeah.
Yes.
You end up with this issue where people oftentimes believe that, oh well, a computer looking at my information is different than a person looking at my information, or a computer looking at my information is something that is maybe potentially relatively harmless, or one photograph of me in a pile of billions of photographs. Who could ever possibly find it? And I think people oftentimes don't realize how quickly computers operate and how you're able to take and analyze such a large pool of data and learn so much about somebody. I think that a lot of times then even researchers in the field kind of misunderstand the problem of privacy, thinking about it in terms of, well, if I could just figure out how to anonymize a data set, or figure out how to make it so that it's more difficult for somebody to extract that signal, only to find out 20 years later that somebody's managed to come up with a solution, or actually oftentimes even just 2 months later, a solution that does manage to extract that signal from the noise. My personal belief is that if you're going to achieve privacy, you only are going to achieve privacy by making certain that the information that is actually private stays in the hands of the user, that the information never gets put on a server, never gets taken out of their control and handed off to some other company, is not stored in whether it be forever on something like current technologies for blockchains, but is also not stored in a data warehouse, is not even necessarily stored merely encrypted with some set of key escrow. Like, you need to be able to make certain that the only way that you're going to be able to get access to that information is by going through the person. Like, if the only person who should have the encryption key for your own data is you. But I don't know.
All right. Thank you. Trinabh.
Hello. Yeah, so I actually think that, private data privacy is important. It's increasingly becoming important. And in order to understand that, you need to consider the different perspectives. So perspective of a consumer who's like browsing these online services, perspective of the enterprise, who's providing these services, and also the perspective of the regulator. So you need to consider all three of these. Now, from consumer's point of view, I think Jay spoke quite a bit. So you are generating all of this data that's going, you're losing control of this data because you don't know where it's going, what it's getting used for. Now, within that, there are two aspects to consider. So one is like some of this information, like your related to identity, like your social security number, your license number, you immediately feel threatened because you think that maybe it's going to get leaked and some financial harm or something bad is going to happen. But there's a lot of other information that you don't immediately think that is harmful, but you don't really know what can happen with that. So for example, even if you're, let's say, watching movies on Netflix, so even just this information of what you're browsing or what you're watching can help enterprises build a profile about you. Like, what are your religious beliefs? What are your cultural affiliations? What's your sexual orientation? And all of that, you might not immediately think that that's like, breaks your privacy, but you don't know what bad can happen with that, right? So that's the consumer perspective. It's very important, the privacy thing. From the enterprise's point of view, they are trying to monetize data, right? That's the business. Google is in the advertisement business, Facebook too. From their point of view, today, consumers are becoming more and more sensitive to privacy. So they want to have a brand which is sort of privacy aware. So they want to have a picture which says that, okay, we are monetizing data, but we really, really respect your privacy. So from their perspective, privacy is important for brand purposes, I think. Now the third perspective is regulators. So regulators are trying to protect the citizens, of the country, right? And from their perspective, what they want is that the data shouldn't be used to target you in bad ways. You're in a democracy. It shouldn't be used to do some micro-targeting that's against politics or whatever it is, right? So I think increasingly important from all these three different perspectives.
I see. So I have two arguments. It's kind of the devil argument, saying, so I want to propose these arguments and I want to get responses. So the first one would say, okay, I'm not so special person. Why should I worry? My data is hidden among billions of other users and I don't have anything to hide. So that's the first one. And the second one I hear a lot in academic communities, which is very sad, is, once we have anonymity, since we are in a blockchain conference, once we have anonymity of payment, for example, in Bitcoin, illegal activities will rise. We have drug dealing, we have terrorism, and the same with privacy. Like I write paper on this and people will say, if you can help users hide their identity,
how would you prevent terrorists from doing that? So, well, how would we respond on these two arguments? And I'm happy to take responses.
Yeah, I can tackle the first one, which is like, I'm not special, my data doesn't really matter. I mean, and to be honest, I think I empathize with that because I was sort of like this too, where for a long time I'm like, so what if they know my birth date and my social security number? Like, why does it matter? I don't care if anyone knows about it. Like, why should I care? And that's actually most people. That's probably gonna be most people for the rest of their lives. But I think what changed for me was when I realized that someone can use that information to harm me. And that did actually happen to me. And it kind of like all lit up at the light bulb went off. I was like, oh wow, okay, so like this is why privacy is important, because it's not about whether that data is important or not, it's about like how that data could be used against you. And that's when it gets a little bit scary. So I think how I view it is like, it's kind of like one of those things where it should just be a human right to have privacy because you don't know how that will be used. And you don't realize until it's almost too late.
The way I would look at the question about, I'm not special, I have nothing to hide, is I would look at the question of, well, not a question, but the perspective of everyone is special to somebody. And because everyone is special to somebody, and maybe you're special to the wrong somebody. And it's for example, if you look at cases of domestic abuse and stalking, and you look at even sexual assault, a lot of it is people you know. And the people you know not only are potentially in a privileged network position to be able to get information about you, are not only in a position of privileged device access in order to be able to hack the computers that you have, but are also potentially in a society where tens of thousands of people work for companies like Amazon, tens of thousands of people work for Facebook, work at tech companies with privileged access to your warehoused data. And the idea that I'm not special, no one, why does some large corporation or some government care about me? But then you realize that your ex-boyfriend is the person who's now working at Lyft and is watching where your cars are going, or is your cousin from this strange side of the family that's decided. It's everyone has reasons why they want people to keep certain things private. In some sense, I will also point out that it's hypocritical in so many ways of companies to be like getting into that bandwagon because if it's impossible to get technology that really makes things private, then how do large corporations keep information private from each other? And so in order for somebody like Facebook to have something like trade secrets, we need to be able to have communication channels that are actually secure. And then the second half of your question, which was about terrorists and be able to stop criminals and things. I mean, I would point out that if, let's say, look at existing technologies that we have. Is the internet not incredibly useful for terrorists? Is the mail system not incredibly useful for terrorists? I can go to any random mailbox in any random city and drop an envelope into it, and it will, without having any identification information on it, and it will appear anywhere else in the country that I'd like. Somebody else can use. People might look at it and try to scan it, but they don't know who sent it. It is in some sense actually a pretty useful anonymity technology. And we have, the world has not ended. We have the ability, or we've often had, if anything, we've decreasingly had the ability to have private communication within one's home. And the world had not previously ended because of the ability for people to speak in private. It is not at all clear to me that anonymity or privacy lead to terrorism.
So Trinabh, you probably hear this same argument in different conferences. How would you respond to that? Because it really hurts me that I hear this in
the argument on terrorism.
Yes.
So I actually think, so in principle, you can keep things private and anonymous while actually doing all your detection that you want to. So it is possible. It's not like you're in one world or the other. So I know this probably seems counterintuitive, but it's possible to have both of these things. To be able to communicate anonymously, but also do sort of fraud detection or like all of this, whatever detection that you want to do. And we can go deeper into some of that technology.
Yeah, so speaking about that, you worked in PIR, which is Private Information Retrieval. I'd like to explain to us what is PIR and what are the applications and how can we use it?
Yeah, so PIR is an acronym for a cryptographic protocol called Private Information Retrieval. So basically, it's like the following. So let's say, I mean, you guys have some objects, some libraries, some items that you have, and I want you to download or retrieve one of those objects. I can do that without telling you which object I just retrieved. Okay, it's possible. So let's say you are on Netflix, and I want to stream a movie. I can stream a movie without telling you which movie I'm streaming. Okay, so this is the protocol, this private information retrieval protocol allows you to do that. And why is it important? Because now I don't have to share my queries or my sensitive information with you, but I can still use your service. That's what I'm saying. It's not like you get one or the other, you can have both of these things. Like in the context of media, like this Netflix example, so I mean the reason I want to hide the queries is because, again, like I had said before, it can tell you what my sexual orientation is, what my cultural beliefs are, political leanings, everything. You can build a profile and do advertisements or do micro-targeting.
And can that be applied for search queries, like on search engines and stuff? And what are the limitations?
So some of these technologies, so these are based on some underlying cryptographic protocols. There are many of them. You might have heard homomorphic encryption, that's sounding, in the news quite a bit these days. There's something called secure multi-party computation. They're very general purpose primitives. They can be used to build any type of system. And people, at least in academia, in the research community, people have built systems that are plausibly deployable. These are your databases. So I can query your database without telling you what I'm querying, without revealing my query. These are machine learning systems. So let's say you were a cloud provider. I could give you my training data, encrypted. You'll be able to train a model over it, but never know what the training data was. Okay, I could do search over, let's say you were my email provider, you had my emails, I could do search over that email without telling what I'm searching for, or without telling what my emails are. So very general purpose, you can apply them broadly. They are becoming plausibly deployable. 10 years ago, they were very impractical, but today you'll be able to go online, get some open source code that actually runs, that is not too slow relative to your status quo, so whatever exists today.
It's very cool, thank you. So Jay, I want you to talk to me about Orchid Labs and VPNs. We are in a democratic society. Why would I hide my IP? And tell me examples, because I'm from Egypt. I'm coming from a not so democratic society, and I understand why VPN is very important, because there are so many things there that are blocked. But why should we care? I want you to give your pitch about.
Well, I'll start with the idea that let's get a simpler attacker for a second.
Yeah.
So you're at this conference right now, and
Yes.
maybe you're connected to the UCSB Wi-Fi. The question now is not what government or corporation is able to access it, but whatever UCSB IT person is able to access it. And for a long time, I knew the UCSB IT person who was in charge of the network here, and maybe I don't want him to know what I'm accessing. If you go to a coffee shop, if you go to another person's company and you'd like to get access to the Wi-Fi, unless you essentially very staunchly, always use your cellular connection and tether and just accept that you don't have internet access when you don't have access to the cellular connection, you end up being weirdly reliant upon other people who are not large companies or governments, but are normal people that you know, that you can see and that can see you. In order for your privacy to be preserved. And when you're using VPN technologies, what you're doing is you're able to remove nearly all of that dependency on that local party. You're able to push the question of who are you trusting with what to the location that you feel most comfortable doing that. So if you already have a relationship with, for example, Cox Cable, and you would like to be able to trust them, you could shift your network connectivity to them. Maybe you don't trust your local, however, your local branch of Cox Cable somehow, and so you'd like to be able to push that off to a further away destination. But now you have the same problem I mentioned earlier, where it's like, okay, well, if I know you're using a particular VPN, a particular company, maybe I go get a job there in order to attack you. So now we're going to need to be able to, just in order to protect you, not from companies and governments, but to protect you from people you know, we're going to need to be able to figure out how to make it so that when they go and get a job at that company, they don't know which of those incoming connections is you. So in order to do that, we're going to have to try to do some kind of indirect multi-hop access so that they don't have to have jobs in multiple companies all simultaneously at the time of individual connections in order to trace them. That, maybe they could coordinate it. Maybe they could actually, I mean, it's starting to get to the point where sometimes there are people who actually care deeply enough and are willing to spend, a couple of years trying to build up some kind of conspiracy relating to things. If you could essentially, instead of choosing from a pool of 20 VPNs and 20 VPN companies, you were able to, that you could actually get jobs at, you were able to choose from a pool of tens of thousands of end users. And you're able to make those choices randomly and continually, you could actually break all of that cycle and make it essentially possible for people to be able to trace all of that. Now the question is how do you actually do those random selections securely? And that's one of the missions of Orchid Labs. We're releasing some initial technology that is helping you do multi-hop VPN access and is allowing you to do registration, but we are continuing to work on the problem of how to do the complete random selection process.
Okay, I have a follow-up on this, but I'll get back to this very soon. So, Preethi, what is True Story, and what's the difference between True Story and Twitter?
Really good question. True Story is a debate network where people come together to debate controversial topics that you can't really debate anywhere else. So if you try to go debate most controversial topics on Twitter, what happens? You kind of get rammed to the corner, called stupid, dumb, whatever it is. Everyone kind of just wants to live in their little bubble and believe what they want to believe, but on that platform, we specifically have it so that if you create a debate, then we want to see both sides, so that you can back it or you can challenge it, and we try to bring the two sides together. Not that they're going to ever agree, but at least to acknowledge that two sides do exist. And the way we're different is that we try to make these debates productive, because on Twitter they're not really that productive at all, by having skin in the game. And so you're staking crypto when you write an argument, and if you are doing anything bad, like trolling, spam, being aggressive, whatever it is, like you get penalized. And just that little thing, that skin in the game, makes a huge difference in terms of how people conduct themselves on the platform, because they know that there's a penalty for doing it. So it's actually incredible how powerful skin in the game is for a lot of things, as Trinabh says, but it actually does work. And if you go on True Story and you say something versus if you go on Twitter, you say something, like it'll be a completely different reaction. And I've tested this out myself, where I'll say something on True Story and I'll say the same thing on Twitter, and Twitter I'll get like so much backlash and negativity. Whereas on True Story, people are like genuinely trying to understand me and see the other side, etc. So that's the platform we're building, and I think it's absolutely necessary in this day and age where you're starting to see the world fractionalize into two sides, and no one can really realize that it's not one side or the other, it's kind of both. And we're going to keep fractionalizing unless we actually acknowledge and have some empathy towards one side and the other side, and kind of get together, because otherwise we're just going to keep splitting up into these different groups. And I don't think that's progress. I think progress is building on each other rather than fighting each other. And I think True Story really serves that need.
I think. So, if I have an argument and I want to post it, I will put some stakes that I could lose if this argument is bad, or?
Yeah, so how we do it is we have a set of values and guidelines for what we consider productive debate. And everything relies on those values and guidelines. And so the community is trained to follow those values and guidelines, and they're also trained to our downvote arguments that don't follow those values and guidelines. So if there's a consensus decision amongst the community that that argument doesn't follow values and guidelines, then you get penalized. So it's not the company, like Twitter does this in a very centralized way, where they'll like, if your tweet, my boyfriend, like he got banned from Twitter for saying something controversial. That was Twitter's decision to ban him. For us, it's the community has to decide to penalize someone.
But if the majority of the community are
Yes,
on
so that
one
means,
stream?
so that means we have, like, exactly, so just like any decentralized network, it only works if, like, it can have a 51% attack. Like, that's the nature of decentralized networks, right? Like, so if a majority of our users are right, like, some leaning or some, have some bias, then of course it doesn't work. But that's every crypto network, right? And so it's our job to kind of build a community that it has both sides, and we think about that actively, actually.
So I have a question for both of you. How would you start such networks? How would you guarantee that not the majority at the beginning are malicious? Like, for example, if I'm using Tor browser, I know that the FBI could be monitoring me. How would I avoid that in Orchid Lab? And the other similar part is, how would you guarantee that not the majority of the users of True Story are malicious at the beginning? So I'm happy to take.
You said if you're using Tor browser?
Like if I'm using Tor browser and it's gonna try to route my traffic through multiple hubs peer-to-peer, and if these hubs are controlled by the FBI or whoever, like majority of them, they might know what's my traffic. And there are incidents of that. How would you avoid that in Orchid Lab? That's like the seeding point. How would you stop it?
Yeah, so actually, very explicitly, the way that we've been working on seeding this is by working with larger VPN partners in order to be able to get them interested and onboarded on the system. And we have people at Orchid Labs whose job is to help them get our software executing, but to make it so that it's all their infrastructure. We have no control over it once we actually go live and launch. And that way we have a large base of what we are hoping to be non-malicious groups. Now, that said, there is still a concern because, well, as I pointed out, sometimes the company is not your friend, right? And when you have large companies, that can also be a point of weakness in the sense that you can then go and try to like infiltrate them, get access to their information. And so we have a model that involves essentially a federated recommendation system, a federated reputation management system built upon what we call curators. And so curators are actually they're a Turing-complete on blockchain mechanism that allows for extensibility in how people get to decide how to filter the set. And so, like, for example, when you bring up Tor, Tor has these 9 directory servers, and they're run by 9 people who decide which nodes are considered okay and which aren't. And those 9 people try to figure out that one's actually probably not an okay node and remove it. Those 9, if you wanted to make a curator for Orchid that was the same 9 people, and that is how you trusted the system, you could implement that. But alternatively, you might have particular nonprofits or particular third-party consumer report style advocates who are working, and they can decide on how the lists are working, and you get to choose. It's all federated.
Thank you. So about True Story.
Sure, that's a really good question, especially for decentralized networks where seeding the initial network is super important. I think a lot of people look at decentralization as like this holy grail and think that like from the very beginning it has to be super decentralized. I have a very different view on that. And we didn't build True Story that way either. Like when we first launched the network, it was invite only. And we wanted the core group of people to be people who we thought can follow the values and guidelines of the community, because they are basically our Genesis users, and people copy other people. So the reason Twitter is very obnoxious is because they see other people being obnoxious, so they think it's okay for them to be obnoxious, so they just copy that behavior. On True Story, you don't see that. You don't see people being obnoxious. So, and if you do that, you get penalized. So we wanted that initial set of users to basically set the mold, the model of how we want users to interact. And so we did have it invite only. And that goes against decentralization, but I don't really believe that if you just launch a network, all of a sudden it's going to magically form with the right users. Like, that's just not how it works. You have to massage it into action. And then, like, an example is even Bitcoin, right? Like, Bitcoin was like Like, it was like Satoshi who went in these private forums and invited a few people who we thought would be interested to launch this Bitcoin network with him. It wasn't this like worldwide launch, decentralized launch from the very beginning. Bitcoin could have been very easily attacked for the first 5 years of it, with not that much money. So I think like decentralization happens over time, and if you want to see the network well, I think you have to take it a very hands-on approach. Yeah.
And I also think that there are many different possibilities to further reduce the trust, right? So in a lot of these systems, the threat model or the trust assumption is that majority of the parties are not malicious.
Yeah.
But you can actually reconfigure these systems so that you assume trust that at least one of these many parties is not malicious, right? So you can further strengthen that model. In the context of anonymous communication systems, people have done that. So there are several, by anonymous communication, again, you have something like WhatsApp, where the messages are encrypted, but also in the information on who's communicating with whom and at what times of the day, all of that information is also hidden, all that metadata, right? So there are certain systems, not production ready yet, but at least in research prototypes, where you can do this kind of thing while only trusting that one of these many participants is not malicious. The rest can be malicious. So that's also fine. So
So I have a question for you, Trinabh. Can you tell us, like in 2 minutes, what are you do privacy research and systems research. So what are the advances in these areas, and then how far are we from practicality? Like, can these technologies be used right now at scale?
yeah, so again, from the crypto standpoint, there are many of these technologies that existed for several years. They're becoming more and more practical. Like I said before, they're being used in databases, they're being used for machine learning, they're being used for anonymous communication. To give you a couple of examples, these technologies are getting deployed. So I know of a company where they're trying to do sort of password matching. So essentially, when you log into some website like your, Wells Fargo or whatever website, your password might have been compromised, right? So this company out there, they have a set of passwords that they know are compromised from the dark web, right? And then when you submit your password, they do a match with that database to figure out whether your password was compromised, is in that set of like compromised passwords. And then they shoot you an email that you should change your password. Now, in this particular scenario, you don't want to share your password with this third party that is doing the check, right? And this third party doesn't want to share this set of passwords with you, because if you learn this password and if you're a hacker, then you could obviously do bad things. So this technology is getting deployed, is being used by some of the large banks. This problem is called private set intersection. The technology is not used in a general purpose way just yet because it's getting to practicality, but there are certain use cases where it's actually deployed today. So, yeah.
And so, if I'm using Facebook, and one could say, okay, it's a free service, why don't I use it? Is it actually free? And if it is not, what are we paying? And then what is the right model? This is like a complicated question, so like few comments. What's the right model? Is it subscription model, or what's the right model for such social network?
Yeah, I think obviously it's not free because you're paying with your data. That's simple. And your data is being sold to advertisers. That's how they make money. And people don't think about this because it looks free on the outside, but it's not. But with the right model, I think that's what we're trying to figure out, right? I don't think anyone has the answer, and I think we're in that phase where there has to be experimentation. And I think it will depend on what type of social network you're also building. Like, subscription could work if you want it to be a very private, insular, like small community. Maybe you just want to use it to talk to X number of people. And also you have to kind of afford that too, so it's not gonna detract a bunch of other people. So it's probably a small market that would pay to communicate. But then, for example, with True Story, we're using a token, and everything is transactional. And so our business model is transaction fees, almost like a game, where the more people transact on the platform for debating, the more money we make as a company. Yeah, so I think in terms of the business model and what is the right way, I think it's up to entrepreneurs now to really experiment and figure out, like, are there other ways really to build a sustainable network that doesn't rely on ads? Because that's like the billion-dollar question here. And I don't know if we figured that out, because ads are so easy and they are a drug and it's everywhere. So for us to think that we can replace that with something all of a sudden sustainable, it's a big, lofty goal.
So another thing to point out here is obviously, like, I mean, we are paying with our data, but recently what's happened and what's happening is that very strong regulations have come out, right, against enterprises, and that has also sort of become a new model through which our privacy hopefully gets, improves, right? So GDPR, so data protection regulation, that's come out that says that an enterprise, if they violate, privacy, they'll be fined 4% of global annual revenue. That is really, really big. So it's global annual revenue. Each year you can be fined 4% of it, right? So something called California Consumer Privacy Act. So that's getting enforced January 1 of 2020, and that also like imposes huge fines. So I mean, that's another model where although we are uploading our data, we are paying in terms of our data, and that's getting monetized. But hopefully our privacy doesn't get broken just because of these, like enterprises need to enforce this.
Jay?
I think there's something also subtle to point out here. So it's a relation to what data does Facebook have on people, and then how that interacts with things like regulations. So I'm a strong proponent of having regulations on companies like Facebook, but I think that the regulations that we currently have, things like GDPR and the California data privacy, are working under an assumption that we're going to hand all of our data to Facebook, and I think that that's already like a flawed initial premise. To me, I feel like if we're going to have regulations, it should be that we've decided as a society that there are certain kinds of technologies that just aren't built correctly and cannot be built correctly, and that we are then not going to use that kind of technology in things that are going to go to end users, unless maybe if you're the kind of person who believes that nothing should be fully restricted, at least without the giant warning label that says, like, this is toxic, like cigarettes or something, right? And in the case of, for example, storing data at Facebook, the big concern that I have is I just don't think you can fix that. So I'll look at even things like the password database, and so we can have a database where the passwords are all hashed and the passwords are all designed so that I can send maybe even like with a particular a new salt each time I can send a hashed password and then make it so that they don't know what password I'm doing the query on. When I do the query, but when a hit occurs, when I actually my password is in the database, you now can look at who did the query at what time in order to actually, and now it's quite likely that the person who was doing that query was the person whose password is hacked in the first place. And so now you know that if Bank of America, for example, is checking that constantly, you now know, oh, Jay tried to log into Bank of America at 5 p.m. at a particular, with some reasonable probability, or we try to create an account at Bank of America. And so I think that there's oftentimes just like increasing levels of danger that we don't realize because of how subtle all the data and metadata collection can be. Because it's not just a matter of, for example, encrypting all the communication that people have. It's also about making certain that you don't know who's talking to whom. And you look at, for example, even like Signal. Signal is end-to-end encrypted, but Signal's servers actually know where the message came from, where the message is going to. And Signal servers, even to the point where they claim that they don't track or store any of this stuff. And there was even like a line of code where you could actually see, or at least for 24 hours, they had to keep track of that for their weird anti-spam protection. I think that when you have that regulation, I think it then, to make the follow point you were saying, I think it changes the kind of social network you can build. I think that if you have a regulation that says that people's data must be local to them, or that the kinds of moderation and filtering that are available are not centralized because you can't have, there's no one party who's allowed to see all of the content. I think you end up with fewer automatic discovery systems. I think you end up with a lot less of the systems that we've been terrified of recently that are affecting our democracy and are causing, like the algorithms on YouTube that drift people into more and more extremist positions in the form of the discovery process, the advertisement targeting. I think that you are almost required to build something that feels a lot more personal, something like a much simpler model of Facebook where you have friends that you follow, and the friends that you follow, if you don't like the content that they have, you know exactly who it was and you can unfollow them.
I have a quick follow-up to that, which is kind of trying to see the other side of the argument too. I think it's easy to keep calling Facebook evil, but you also want to think about the other side of the equation, which is that there's like hundreds of thousands of businesses that thrive off Facebook ads. Like, they wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for Facebook ads. Like, they're not making money for no reason. They're actually providing value to these businesses. So you got to think about, like, okay, would we destroy all these businesses if we just get rid of Facebook? Because I know, like, you know, my friends who tried marketing on Facebook, it's a gold mine, like, for them. They make so much money just off Facebook. And I have friends that businesses survive purely because of Facebook. So I think, like, you got to think about both sides and what are the trade-offs to not having that data as well.
Okay, I think we are running out of time. We have 5 minutes, so I want to end after we scare people about privacy. We want to just tell them what to do. Like, we have practices. What should we do? So I want advice for the crowd. What can we do to preserve our privacy, and which direction we should push forward towards? Is it regulation? Is it the way we think about our data? So, yeah. So each of us has like 2 minutes or something. Trinabh.
Yeah, I mean, just go by a simple rule. If I feel that there is something that I'm going to embarrassed about, like seeing 20 years from today, I just don't try to put that on the internet. Like, I mean, not even email, nowhere really. Like, oftentimes, like, personally, I just have this, I mean, I try to use different mechanisms of communication, like spread it out, like sometimes call people, sometimes text them, use WhatsApp, at least it's end-to-end encrypted, at least what they say. Yeah, so I would just say, I mean, just be careful. I think we don't realize today what bad can happen in the future. Maybe not immediately anything bad will happen, but like as I progress from being a student to a professor, like I've realized that, I mean, certain things have become much more private now. So, I mean, student life, I didn't feel that way, but yeah, so just need to be careful.
Okay.
Really complex thing about trying to answer a question like that is that it oftentimes comes down to trade-offs. And those trade-offs have extreme downsides on the other side that can actually cause problems to your ability to even fight the fight that you're fighting. So, for example, simple comments that people oftentimes make is, well, don't use Facebook. You know, log off a social network. Was it really that healthy for you to be using in the first place? But at the opposite side, if you're in our local community here in Santa Barbara, how do you get access to all of the information about the governments in Isla Vista and even Goleta? Well, you can find out about them on Facebook. How do you coordinate all of the events in order to be able to actually make it so that people can enact change? Well, we construct a bunch of events on Facebook, and information ends up spreading on Facebook. And I don't think that Facebook's model was required in order to do all of those things, but because we allowed Facebook to exist and now everyone is on it, we are now in the situation where we at least have to be using Facebook long enough to dismantle it. And I think that you run into that situation with a lot of different things, whether it be something, if I were to tell you, for example, to only use tethering and never use Wi-Fi, well, occasionally you're going to be in an interesting situation where you just don't have internet and everyone else does. And now your voice is the one that's being squelched because you believed that it was so important to follow some random piece of advice. So I don't have easy answers. Privacy is something that is very difficult to come by in the world right now because we allowed a competitive environment whereby the oligopoly of companies are essentially have no incentive to construct the system that will be required to help you.
So which direction should we go? Which direction should we push forward to? Like,
as I said before, I believe that we should have regulations that enact I think actually relatively strict boundaries on what kinds of things are and are not allowed. You should not, for example, ever be allowed to have, if you were to do something like, Facebook is not allowed to have moderators look at end-user content under any circumstance. I think that changes the entire social network. I think that just fundamentally changes what it's even possible to do, because it changes how their spam filtering works. It changes how and they would end up having features that currently they think they can build because they can have a centralized moderator make it almost work, that suddenly they just wouldn't be able to build because it would be filled with spam or hate or some other kind of bad content.
Preethi?
I kind of have a contrarian, opposite view about regulation. I just generally don't think regulation is the right way to solve some of these problems. Sometimes regulation just slows down innovation to a halt. And in that argument of like not being able to, content moderators not being able to see content, I'm stealing this from Ashton Kutcher because I was on a panel a month ago and he made a good point of like the fact that, look, like he was in Hollywood and there's a lot of really bad stuff that happens in Hollywood of child pornography. And so if that's happening, do you really want no one to be able to see that and catch that? And that was a really good point, and no one had an answer to that. So I think like my only recommendation for how I go about privacy is sort of what you said, which is like if I don't want this thing to be on the internet, I will never share it. And secondly, I only use platforms from products and companies that I think I can trust. So it comes back to trust. Who can you trust? Me, like I actually really trust Apple because I know the people at Apple, I know the security people at Apple, and I've done my research, and I'm like, okay, I use iMessage extensively, so I trust Apple. But I don't use Messenger. Like I never use Messenger. So it's about like picking and choosing who I trust and using those for communicating, and that's kind of how I go about it.
All right. Regulations for toys or mattresses or building codes or?
Absolutely not. But then how do you differentiate? Like, how do you know?
I think it's a subtle, interesting trade-off, but I point that out because this is the argument that regulation cycles innovations typically is, it's pretty black and white. It's this idea that like technology should be above regulation, whereas when we've looked at all these different historical systems.
Cars is an example, like cars is an example. We used not to have seat belts, but then we figured out that so many people die, so regulation decided that seat belts has to be mandatory, and now we have them and roads are safer. But so I think I see your argument for sure. I mean, I have heard it before.
How many lives has seatbelt saved? Like, actually, have we done the research? Yeah, like I'm just curious because like I actually sometimes like we kind of like for example, I've lived in India for 5 years, right? Literally, the roads are not regulated, and honestly, they have less car accidents than they have in the U.S. So sometimes, I think we like to think sometimes this regulation actually like makes a giant difference, but when you actually look at like how sometimes societies with that regulation function, you're like, are we actually doing anything here with all these like traffic lights and stop signs and roundabouts, or are we just like thinking we're doing something? So I think like, I really question sometimes the extent and the impact of a lot of the regulation out there.
I think there is quite good research on that, but I think we're running out of time, so I would like to end on this note, and I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you so much.